Right. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me again for day 2 of onboarding sessions for week 1 as a regional organizer at Red Wine and Blue. And ordinarily, I do co-facilitate this session with Angela from North Carolina, and she is an amazing storyteller. She previously worked on the Buttigieg campaign and a number of issue advocacy in North Carolina. And so if you ever want to run your story by anyone, by all means, feel free to reach out to myself or Angela regarding this topic. So the what and the how. Yesterday, we talked about relational organizing and how it's most impactful to reach out to your friends, your network, your family, to move them to care about the issues and not only vote at the top of the ballot, but at the bottom of the ballot as well. But many ways in which you do that, it's not just like, hey, come to this thing because you know me and you love me. It's also you compel them towards action by storytelling. And I find, and many folks find, that storytelling is the best way to connect with your network about the issues and move them to action by mobilizing them. And so I'm going to first do my story of self, then we'll break down the components of story of self. You'll have time to craft your own story of self. Then you'll step away from your story. Then we'll convene again, and then we will tell our stories. By no means is there a right or wrong way to tell your story. Your story is your story. Your lived experience is your lived experience. And so that's fact-driven. Your lived experience is what you've gone through. And so that really resonates with folks more so sometimes than just data and figures and polls. You really want to connect folks to why. And I know a lot of you shared some of the work that you all have done in our session yesterday about relational organizing, that you've already been doing it. You've already been telling your story of self, but we really want to make sure that we truncate it. We really want to make sure it's digestible, whether you're talking to someone for an hour, 30 minutes, or it's an elevator speech and it's a minute. And so really and truly, your story is yours and you can craft it for the audience most how you see fit. So I'll start with mine. Yesterday, I did tell you a little bit about how I got involved in the birthing community, and more specifically, Black maternal health and being a doula. But today I'll talk a little bit about organizing in the workplace. And so as you all know, many women are in the workplace. My last workplace was a tech organization, and I was, there were a few women there when I first started. But not as many that are there now, or even gender non-conforming or non-binary folks were there. And so in that role, I joined the largest department at the time, and I was the first Black person hired in that department, even though the organization had been around for almost 14 years. And so for me, it was, I understood the environment very well because I was used to being the only Black person in a room or the only woman in a room in the work I've done working in politics and in financial services. And so shortly after I joined, a lot of the Black, Indigenous, and folks that identified as folks of color on staff, we got together at a staff retreat and we're like, hey, we should have some community and belonging time just to get to know one another. And so it really started out as like a lunchtime. So when we would get together, we periodically had a lunchtime, and it wasn't necessarily that we were getting together in person because we were hybrid at the time. Half of us were remote, the other half were in office. And so we were like, hey, we really just want to talk about what it's like being in this workplace and being a Black person or a person of color in this workplace. And so fast forward, our organization decided to get an analysis of what diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice look like for our organization. And we did some staff surveys, and our leadership quickly learned that diversity was an issue. At the time, we had no people of color or folks from the LGBTQ community in the leadership or on the board. The board was made up entirely of white, rich men from the tech community and our executive director. And so we thought hey, there needs to be some more diversity here. We are working with people across America from a number of demographics. We need to make sure that our staff is not only representative of our users or customers, but also of the lived experiences of some of the staff. too. And so we set out to have a task force, and we worked really hard to come up with a strategic plan to figure out like what is the way in which we do this without tokenizing folks, because it's one thing to have folks represented, but it's another thing to have policies and procedures and structures in place that support all folks in an organization, not just a subset of folks. And so as a result of that, one of the directives was that, oh, folks want to feel more belonging. And so we decided to roll out employee resource groups. And at the time, we were like, okay, we should have some that are like that are identity focused, and some that may be racially or culturally focused. And so in the end, we ended up starting 6 different ERGs, then being one for Jewish identified staff, staff in the LGBTQ community, Asian identified staff, Latinx staff, Black staff, and staff that identified as parents and caregivers. Shortly before I left there, they were initiating having one around mental wellness and neurodivergency. And so as a result of that, I became a leader in starting the ERG for Black staff, and we called it Obsidian, because Obsidian is a stone made out of volcano that is, it's a Black hue, but it's very magical and has all these different powers and healing properties. And so as a result of like being involved, from being the first Black staff person to starting the ERG, we really were able to build a sense of belonging among Black staff and other staff that were part of those other ERGs. I also was a part of the parent and caregivers ERG as well. And so by letting staff, leadership know my experience being as a Black woman, the only Black woman on staff, and even the only parent before I left in that department, I really was able to amplify why we needed these types of structures in the workplace, because it's one thing to focus on customer experience, but a whole nother thing to focus on employee or staff experiences. And so we really wanted to meet the mark and increase engagement across all areas of the organization by having these groups. And so for me, oftentimes still, I'm one of the only Black folks in the room, particularly if it's a leadership position too. But I know that experience helping organize, not only from the community I come from, but also other communities, and being in solidarity with folks and making sure we had the structures in place to support staff in those employee resource groups, I really was able to activate folks. And so even more so now, that ERG went from being 5 members to 40 members. In the time I was there, in 5 years, I saw I was the first Black staff person in that department. Before I left, there were about 10. And overall in the organization, we had increased Black staff by 75%. And so for me, that was definitely a win. And in any big staff that I'm in, I'll be likely an ERG leader. And I thought that it was important for me to tell my story as just someone working in that workplace, and what it was like to confront white supremacy in the workplace, that I was able to add value not only to our work products, but also to the overall organizational culture. And so I'm gonna stop there. I probably could go on and on. I probably missed some details, but I'll give you all an opportunity to ask me any follow-up questions as a result of my story of self before we jump into like the mechanics of setting one up for yourself. Any questions? Okay, cool. Well, crafting your relational story is just like making a salad. Like, you start with like the components. You got to start with the lettuce, the arugula, the kale, whatever it is with yourself. I then try to think about like the protein, like what am I going to do to take this to the next level? And oftentimes it's around, what is the challenge that I really want to relate to folks in my story? Like, what do I want to connect them to? What is the issue I'm most concerned about? And what choices that I have to take to really think about how do I confront the issue, and then the outcome, making sure that the person listening to you understands like you had this issue, you had these choices to make, but how did you make something better, or how were you changed, or how was your community changed as a result of that? I really oftentimes try to relate that to the us bringing folks into the story. All of us have worked. All of us have probably always been the only woman or only person of color in a room at some point in our life. And so I try to connect to the audience and thinking about who's in the room, who is my audience. And then now I really try to think about what is the impact of this moment now. We're in such a critical moment in our nation's history. Like the heart of America is at stake right now. And so really just trying to connect it to, well, that DEI issue is very much connected to some of the work that Archana was doing in Ohio for DEI in her school. And so these things are all interrelated, interconnected, and we all really live at the intersections. I mean, none of us live single issue lives. And so I definitely in my stories make sure I try to like exemplify some other things. Like in that story I just told you, I could have talked about like how I found out I was making less than my white counterpart who had the same role as me, who was hired after me. I could also talk about, there's a number of things where some of the microaggressions I experienced in the workplace and how I had to address them. I really try to like make choice points about like how long the story would be. I really only wanted to go like 5 minutes because I want us to give a little time, but just thinking about what components you want to put together to make your story salad, as I like to call it. And so with that, I'm gonna do that. Yeah, boom. Let me just go back and make sure I didn't miss any things. Yeah, and I definitely want to I'm a naturally like emotional person. And so I would definitely advise you to use details, use emotions, use feelings. These folks are related to you. They're in your community. They've seen you go from being maybe a single person to being a grandparent. Like they've seen you throughout your life have different changes, and definitely connect to those feelings that they've seen you go through quite naturally before you started even doing this work. Definitely practice. I just did that one off the top of my dome, the one I did for you, so don't be like me. But I think that at any point when you like craft it and decide like which story I want to tell, what kind of audience will I tell it to, what components do I want to leave out or put in, and then what is going to be my call to action. Definitely have those things kind of worked out, so that way when you do deliver it, you can, do it off the top of the dome, or you can have a script. It's however you want to do it and what you're most comfortable doing. I also say record yourself. Up until about 10 years ago, I was very afraid of public speaking, but once I had to coordinate enough campaign fundraisers and doing call time and having to talk to finance and labor guys, I got over it real quick. And so I used to record myself on my phone just to like make sure that like my outfit was together or what the screen looked like, or just trying to see like even if I had a background, making sure like my outfit didn't clash. I used to just try different things just to see, or even my presence with holding my hands if I was in person or having to stand at a podium. I practiced those things so that I could deliver my story more succinctly and reduce the distractions. And then also, I would say you want to do an elevator pitch version. I definitely could have told that story in 1 minute. But since it's such a small crowd and I wanted us to get into the things, but even a 1 minute version, back when I was a lobbyist many years ago for a youth policy organization in Illinois, I would oftentimes be at the Capitol and have to jump in the elevator with someone or convince their secretary to talk to me. And so I had to have my spiel down packed really easily. And I always had a 1-pager about the issue. I was advocating for comprehensive sex ed in Illinois. So I always had my 1-pager, and I always had my personal story. I didn't really tell too many of the stories because I was working with young people who went to public schools. And so they would tell their stories. And so I always had that young person with me, or a video of them, or a 1-pager about them, or set up a meeting with them to meet with their state legislator, because I really wanted to make sure that state legislator knew that there was somebody in their district that was connected to it. And so I always had like my little 30-second spiel. I had a spiel for if I caught them in the elevator or if I caught them out at the bars, because I knew out at the bars, they would forget the things, and I would have my business card and the district of the person and like some optics about them, and then they would follow up with me, or they would really just give it to their secretary and the things. And so I always made sure to think about who is my audience and where am I going to catch them at, and are they going to retain this information? And so, and don't worry, you'll forget things. Like that's just the spice of life. We're all human. It's not about perfection here. It's really about making sure folks understand you, why you're engaging them, and how you can move them to action as a result of your story and them connecting to your story. And so without further ado, I am going to bring up this this document so you can see it before we jump in. But I want you to go through this kind of self-guide that Angela created to really think about the self, the now, the us. And there's also a link to a video if you want to watch that from Susan Christopher from the Obama campaign. And this 1 or 2 pager really just drives down the nuts and bolts of how to put it all together, writing it out or a bullet point, reviewing it, making edits, practice saying it, and commit as much of memory to it as you can as possible. And so this is what you'll review for 10 minutes alone by yourself. So that would be from 12:28 to 12:38. And then I want you to give yourself 5 minutes to reflect, to walk away from your story, to like go get some juice or get your run on your treadmill real fast, or any of the, go get a snack, whatever it is, take a beat away from your story, and then we'll come back. And so let's just round it out and say we come back at 12:45, and then actually let's make it a little shorter. Let's come back at 12:42, so that way we get some time to share and ask some questions and so on and so forth. And so I've simplified this down maybe too much, but your story is your story, your experiences are your experiences. And as long as you like look at the framework of the components that you can include in there, I'm sure it will be fine. I mean, more than likely, you're not going to be giving a commencement speech and be before 2,000 people with your story of self next week. That's not what's going to happen. You would definitely put much more preparation into it. And you all have already shared so many parts of your story already. And so don't feel like you have to perfect it. Know that it will evolve over time, just as you will evolve over time. And so that's that part. So any questions before we break till 12:42 to work on your story?
Right. Do you?
And we're back. Can you all see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. I got these 2 screens and it's a little, I don't know, like I'm trying to like look directly at you all, but it also look at other things. So it can be a little challenging, but I guess we're all adapting to Zoom life in real time, in person, in public. So I know I'm amongst friends, so thank you so much for your patience. And so just to just kind of go back a little bit, you had some time to work on your story. I know it wasn't a lot of time, by all means. It takes more than 10 minutes to craft a story, but sometimes it can just be 10 minutes because you've just already been having it going over and over in your head, and you're like thinking like, hey, do I share this or that? And so I know we only have about 16 minutes left, but I definitely want to, first, let's talk about like what challenges did you foresee when you were thinking about this? Like what roadblocks were you hitting, or was it free flowing? So folks could share, like, was this like an easy exercise for you? Or was it like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to like gauge on a scale of 1 to 5 how folks are feeling about this exercise.
I thought it was pretty easy to at least get it started, to at least have a little idea of what I wanted to say, because I always feel like I had my life before 2016 and I have my life now, and that's pretty much where my story starts. That's when I became the person I am now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
I think for me, a lot of it, my challenges were thinking of, like Morgan said, the audience that, I'm going to be using this story for. So, if I'm talking to other moms, I'll probably say something different than if I'm speaking to, 20 somethings with no kids. So kind of thinking about the difference in my story or how I can tailor the story to kind of fit different venues.
First year, Archana, that actually made me be all over the place in a way, because I'm going, do I start here, like when I'm 16 and I have access to Planned Parenthood, and thank God I did, so I don't like now live in a trailer in South Texas with my uneducated husband, because we wouldn't have been able to do anything. Or do I start with Trump years? So I guess I'm a little scattered. I wrote a lot and I have a lot of stuff here, but I don't know if y'all have the same issue that I do, where I'm a little bit scattered as far as like where to start. And I think that I would have a better idea if I had the audience I have in front of me there. It would kind of click in for me, hopefully.
Yeah, I picked a topic so that, because that's what I was feeling like that I needed to focus. So I picked a topic knowing that Michigan is, we're on a recruiting frenzy, I suppose, like for hiring. We're really trying to hire people, right? As Kelly just mentioned. So I started to talk about my story of switching careers recently and feeling impassioned, right? So like I was like, that's what I chose to go with, because I hear what you guys are saying, and I agree, like to have a focus on who we're talking to is helpful. And then the other thing I was just going to mention was, I know I mentioned before, I was with a group called the Parenting Program for 9 years, and it was a volunteer run organization. We had over 500 volunteers. And so I would go and speak to groups often at the end and talk about my why. And we actually, because it was in person, we had like a little gift bag, and we would pull out a picture of this and, just talk about why we felt impassioned to get involved with my personal story. And just this idea of what's my why is what I went back to, what was my emotional response to why I wanted to be involved, kind of like Ray said already. So that it was not too difficult for me, I think, because I focused on who the story was going to be told to, and I thought about my why.
Oh, awesome. These are all great insights. And I think just to go back to your point, Morgan, that free flowing writing is like part of the process. So you did everything right. And I think that like we have to do some free flowing, and like, what are the emotions? I mean, oftentimes in mental health, they're like, oh, journaling is one of the best ways to do self-care and to really get stuff from out of your head to on a paper. And so I think that that is part of the process of doing this, like, and just sitting with it or just walking away from it too resonates well as well. And so
Loved it. I had a blast doing this, because I know exactly where I'm coming from on this, just because I've been living. I learned a long time ago. I learned in grad school, and I also learned from my mom. As a woman, you get your education, you take care of yourself, you never have to depend on a man. That came from my mom. Not necessarily that way, but then I was in grad school, and I had this very impactful video that I watched, basically on he said, she said type thing, is like the books on how women sabotage themselves a lot, and how they speak, how they write, and how we're still playing with their bat and ball. And sometimes we have to adjust, and sometimes we need to do things to make sure we're included. We have to be twice as good. And I'm sure, Ray, you understand this too, is you have to be better than them to be equal. You can't make the same mistakes that they make. And one thing that hit home with my husband one day is my daughter was playing a co-ed basketball game. She was a good basketball player. She's playing with the guys. And she goes, Dad, I have to shoot better than them. He goes, what do you mean? She goes, no, I can't just shoot 50% or whatever. She goes, when I play with guys, I have to be better to have credibility, to say that I'm a player. And so this is all inside of me right now. And so I'm all about empowering women, giving them the tools. And so one of the things that we have to do right now is we have to empower women to go out and make a difference, that you have the power, have tools, have skills, know what you're up against, but you've got to go and you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to support other women maybe who don't have the voice that a strong female does have. And men are scared of strong females. So that's part of the problem. There's been many times where people are like, oh, you're rather intimidating. I'm like, why? He's not. Why am I intimidating, but he's not? So strong, well-armed women can make a huge difference. And if that's the one thing I want to get across to people taking it to this movement is nobody's going to tell me what they can do, what to do with my body. You are not going to tell me what you can do with my body. And that's the anger and the passion that I have for this topic in particular. It's like, you are not going to risk my daughter's life, my daughter-in-law's life, just because you don't believe in something. So that's my passion. And I said too much, but
No,
that's
that's
where I'm
good.
coming from.
That's
Yeah,
great.
that's
That is
That was
good.
awesome.
That's so
Really
good.
good.
Awesome.
And I really like how you like put it on the, what I've really been trying to study and learn more about is emotional and social intelligence. I think so much from an early age, we as female identified folk and women, we have to have a level of self-awareness that our counterparts don't have to have, or social intelligence, depending on multiple identities we have. Like I said earlier, we don't lead single issue lives or single identity lives. And so that emotional and social intelligence piece around like reading the room and making sure that exude the confidence that you have based on your lived experience, and why folks need to mobilize around any of the issues that we all deeply care about. And so with that being said, with 9 minutes left, who wants to share theirs? It doesn't have to be long, it can be short, but who wants to just take a stab at your story of self and let us know about the challenge, the choices, and the outcomes, and why you are doing this now and how you're connecting it to us.
I kind of already did. So you're good.
Yeah.
You got the bullet points of mine. So
Okay,
you're good.
Cool.
So mine, I didn't really tailor mine to any particular group, which I want to go back and do one like, yeah, you're not going to tell me what I can do with my body and what, I mean, I have sons, but it can affect them just as much as it can affect the women. But I will read my story. Because I've got it up here. It says, most people now know me as a political person because that's all I've been pretty much since I've lived in Ohio. I'm the one in the know about local, state, and national government, but I wasn't always that way. I used to be a go with the flow type of person. Whatever, is happening. That was great. Up until 2016, I always thought that the government had my best interests at heart, although I was a little suspicious about George W. It wasn't until COVID hit that I actually thought my government was actively trying to kill me and my family. In November of 2016, the day after the election, I woke up with the worst feeling in the pit of my stomach. I know we can all relate. We all had that feeling. How could our country have elected Donald Trump? How could that have happened? I, of course, blamed it on myself, being a woman. I hadn't done everything in my power to ensure that Hillary Clinton was elected, choosing to believe instead that common sense would prevail and that our country could never elect such a horrible human being that made fun of handicapped people and cheated on his wives. I was so wrong. I vowed then and there to do everything in my power to make sure Trump was a one-term president and to never, ever go down that road again. And that's as far as I made it.
Woo! I love that.
Wow,
I love
Great.
that. I love your story. It's so honest and awesome. And I wish I could like just let you say that directly to a few of my friends, because I don't have that same story. And because I have always been a Democrat, I always have been really, it's multicultural studies. I was I was always a weirdo. I was the one, Roe versus Wade is not going to last through our lifetime. Everybody's like, yes, it is. It's in our Constitution. I'm like, it's not. So I love that, and I love that I could actually say to you, hey, like, I want you to talk to somebody on Zoom. Like, this is great where we can share stories from other people too. Like, I'm gonna share your freaking story, Lynn.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna be like,
do
I
it.
just heard a woman who's like, oh my God, and I think there's so many people like you. I'm sorry I'm talking, but like, I'm so excited. I think your story is amazing. It's exactly who I'm speaking to here in Wilmington. Exactly. You are
All right.
like, you just narrowed it down. If I was teaching a creative writing class, you just got an A++++.
All right. Yay. I start up school again at the end of the month, so I need it.
You're gonna blow it out of the water, girl.
Well, I want to jump off something Ray said earlier and what you just said, Morgan, with the creative writing too. Like you did a word dump. I had one teacher that called it, I'm thinking that's what you did. word vomit, where, you know, you
Yeah,
just
word
get all the
vomit.
stuff out of your brain, and, you know, and those are all great jumping points too. And that's A+ for creative writing too. That's how it starts, is looking chaotic sometimes and just getting it all out. So I, you know, I just want to say A+ to you too for doing it that
Yeah.
way, you know? Yeah. I think
Well,
they're
and
both
that's
good
what
ways.
I learned too in my last class. You just write. You just
Yeah.
write. You write
Yeah.
for 10 or 15 minutes, and you just write whatever
See
pops
what
into your
comes.
head, and then you narrow it down.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And you've probably got 2 or 3 different stories within
Yeah,
everything you
right,
wrote
right, right.
down. So you've got different, you know,
Right.
people that you can talk to. You can talk to the 20-year-olds. You
Right.
can talk to
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
50-year-olds. You can talk to the men.
Yeah, I have like one that starts with Planned Parenthood and ends with like kind of what you're talking about, you know, my body, my choice. I have some that like talk about, because school board is such a huge issue here, you know, banning books and access to, you know, sexual education and all these ways children have of educating themselves that are threatened, and threatening public education in and of itself. We don't need to make America dumber. Like we've already done that, you know.
Yeah.
We need to make America smarter, and all women, even if their moms tell them they need education, can't get it. I mean, I paid for my own school, and I wish somebody had some interest in me and had told me that I could get financial aid instead of me working 3 freaking jobs in college like an idiot, not getting a college, you know, I didn't get a college experience. I didn't get, you know what I mean? It was like work, work, work. Just different things like that, where you have all these life experiences and you can hone them all into these little, you know, and you've got those stories you can tell on the fly in an elevator. They can be short. Yeah. I think we can have like more than one story, right? But I freaking love your story is the bomb, and like works for just, yeah, it's really great. And Trish has got so much passion. Y'all are awesome.
Yeah.
It's so motivating. I was like, I want to come to North Carolina, Ohio. I want to go to all the targeted states and like hear you all speak in real time, because also
I'm just pissed. I'm
Yeah.
just really pissed. I've been pissed for 6 years now.
I'm getting
And I
that from
I
you,
have to have
girl.
a
I'm getting
positive,
that.
I have to have
Oh,
a positive outlook for my pissed offness. And so
Yeah,
this is
it's
my
hard.
positive.
I put a book in the chat. I think it's such a phenomenal, life-changing book. It's called Rage Becomes Her, and it talks about how women have been conditioned to appease and to, like Ray was saying, you know, just check out our environment to stay safe all the time, and that we don't have easy access to our anger. And it's really an emotion that reminds us of a visceral wrongdoing and allows action to happen. And then often men are only given access to anger, right? So, you know, kind of like what you were talking about in a room and everything. So it's a phenomenal, for me, it was a life-changing book. Yeah.
You don't look pretty when you're angry.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Smile.
Recommend that
Smile
book
more.
to my daughter.
Smile. You'll look prettier.
Yeah, I'll have to recommend that book to my daughter. She, you know, she runs the DEI student group at her school, and a lot of boys won't join it because they are intimidated by her. Because the woman who runs things is intimidating to middle school. Well, I'm sorry that she's not just all about makeup and clothes and making you happy.
Yes.
She's
good for her. I love it. That's their problem. If they're intimidated, that's their problem. That's not her problem. She should not back away from that. Good for her. Yeah.
That's really amazing. And I think that like just this conversation has been so invigorating today. I was a little like coming into it, but I was like, oh, I knew we were going to have a very thoughtful and vulnerable conversation as well. And so I also dropped in the chat a speech from Audre Lorde on the use of anger, and there can be a place for anger. And I just really want folks to lean into that. Like we're doing this because we're often we're angry about the way our community is shifting, how their impact and how society as a whole is deteriorating. And so use that anger, channel it for passion and for motivation, and your lived experiences. Like people can argue with some facts, but they can't argue with you about like, no, I went through X, Y, and Z. And so this is a way in which to counter some of the things they may hear in the news. They may say, well, I read this study from, you know, Moms for Liberty, and they said X, Y, and Z. Well, no, actually, my child was in this school district was bullied in this way, and this is what I took to address this. And so I think that that's a great way to counter some of that wacky extremist stuff too, is say like, no, you know what, actually, this was my experience though, and that
Yeah.
really shuts folks down.
It does.
Oh, Tarana Burke. Oh yeah, I really love her too.
Well, the
Oh,
community organizing part, there's a lot of community organizing in there, kind of like, Obama's book and Michelle Obama's book as well, but Tarana Burke goes more into it, like, which is interesting. She really does talk about, and also sort of like the undermining that can happen as well from, yeah, and stealing of thunder.
right.
Little stealing of thunder going on there. But how can we, okay, I'm a Zoom dork, because I haven't really done never really done the chat stuff so much. Is there any way to like capture the chats or?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that in the recording, I can, I have access to the chat. So I can make sure I have access to the chat, because the recording comes straight to me. And I think that if I gave you a direct link to it, you could see the chat. So
Okay.
I'll make sure on this one.
Because
that
everybody always has such cool stuff to say in the chat, but I really, I love to just really concentrate on what's going on.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely, definitely. And trying to think. For some reason, I don't think I added you all to the RO onboarding Slack channel, which folks last week were like chatty Kathy in there. And then because Monday I was not here. And so I'll add you there too, because we could just drop like resources and stuff
okay.
there. So when
I
folks
think
like
Drew added us to that.
Yeah, we are in the
Me?
organizers chat.
Or it's
Auto onboarding.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then that,
we,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
we're
if
on,
everybody could drop stuff over there too, just in case the chat isn't
Oh,
nice.
okay.
yeah,
Well, that's a good idea.
here. I think all of us are here. I'm looking.
Yeah.